Hello, Adam's child. Welcome to this short sermon about the very curious case of albinism in the Fallout world. Something I've thought about more and more since first playing Fallout 3. So, let's crank up the rads and get into it. Fallout 3 kind of traumatized me. Maybe it's more accurate to say that the Broken Steel DLC scarred me with its new endgame creature variants. I'm running along, safe in the thought of my endgame power armor and energy weapons, helping me deal with anything that the game can throw at me at this point, only to run up on some sort of big, white scorpion. No problem, I think, as I start to blast away at it, while that health bar barely budges. Panicking, I switch to something more powerful, but by now the scorpion is right on top of me, and with only a few strikes, it's obvious that I am pretty effed. All chemmed up, and after enough stim packs to kill a Brahmin, I finally declare victory, but these albino rad scorpions have seared themselves into my memory while they tanked mini nukes, ripped me a new butthole, and to top it all off, gave me basically nothing in return for finally ending that devil spawn. But these encounters, which I know you've all had at least once, planted a thought that has only grown through time and subsequent games. What in Adam's name is up with albinism in the Fallout series? The east coast of the US, which is the setting for Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and 76, has absolutely no shortage of albino variants for a multitude of creatures. Albino mongrels, anglers, rad stags, yaoguai, mirelurk hunters, rad toads, wolves, gator claws, obviously can't forget rad scorpions, and even the mighty deathclaw can be found colorless, but they are absolutely no less deadly. What even is albinism though? Is it just a lack of color? If that is the case, then perhaps creature variants like the pale fog crawler would also count, even though it's not explicitly referred to as albino. Truthfully, there is no one straightforward description, since albinism affects many kinds of animals, and different taxonomies produce color in their skin, scales, feathers, etc., in many different ways. For humans and most other mammals, it's a lack of melanin that is the key component. It's due to recessive genes that are responsible for the production of melanin, like, for example, through the production of the enzyme tyrosinase, not sure which one. Because there is so much variation within animals, and a high number of different genes that impact an organism's coloration, not all albinos are perfectly colorless, nor do they always have the red or pink eyes that we so often associate with albinism. This seems to comport with what we see in Fallout, where some albino creatures, like the albino wolf in Fallout 4, looks exactly like the normal gray wolf. Looking at it, I wouldn't think it's albino at all if it weren't for the name, and that's because things are rarely so straightforward in nature. But one thing that is fairly universal, in the real world at least, is that albinism is rather rare. Although some kinds of animals have higher chances to manifest it, like amphibians, which have an estimated 1 in 400 chance, often the chances are much lower, like with humans, which have a 1 in 20,000 chance. And it's even rarer for groups like crustaceans. This is where we see the first big difference with the Fallout world. Albinism is much more common amongst the mutated wildlife than in the real world, especially for mammals. For human NPCs, it actually seems pretty similar to the real world. Canonically, there is only one known person with albinism, the NCR Ranger called Ghost in Fallout New Vegas that serves as Overwatch at the Mojave Outpost. That said, encountering albino creatures is level dependent, so there will be stretches where you barely see any, and then all of a sudden you'll start to see them all over the place. Even still, the encounter frequency is much higher than in the real world. What could account for this higher frequency? Of course, we can blame the ever mysterious and powerful force of radiation and the limitless mutations we see it induce throughout the series. That is for sure the most convenient way to explain any organic changes we see in Fallout, but it's not the only one. Pollution and chemical exposure could account for some of it, as it has been observed in the real world that heavy metal exposure to eggs of certain species of fish results in higher instances of albinism. And we're talking about chemistry here, not music. In fact, there seems to be a precedent in Fallout for something similar, an event that happened just before the Great War that could be the genesis of the albino radstags, and maybe even radstags in general. Before the Great War baptized the earth in nuclear flame, a man that lived in West Virginia named Bill Thomas was dealt a tragic hand when he first lost his wife, only to learn sometime later that his only remaining companion, Winston, his dog, had contracted cancer. Bill was a chemist by education, and he resolved to cure Winston's cancer by formulating some sort of cure to save his best friend. After a few attempts, he synthesized an experimental treatment that he was sure would work, and he decided to put it in the farm's aerosolizer to give his dog constant exposure. But he unwittingly dosed a nearby herd of deer with his concoction. The deer mutated, apparently assuming the ghastly appearance of the common radstag, but they also lost all their color, becoming the first albino radstags, and possibly the first radstags ever. Bill's skeleton can be found next to the undecomposed body of his dog Winston, who had also mutated and albinified due to the treatment. Albinified? Albinofied? Anyway, the point is that unknown chemicals or substances could also be to blame, since the wasteland is just awash in both holy radiation and pre-war pollutants. But human genetic tampering could also be to blame. The only instance of what may be research-induced albinism is for the relatively rare West Coast gulper that is only seen in the Fallout TV show. These gulpers share a much different look than the East Coast gulpers. Physically, they are very close to axolotl salamanders. But these gulpers were the product of Vault Force scientists hybridizing human and animal species together in an attempt to increase people's natural radiation resistance. It definitely ended poorly. But the gulper's apparent albinism may be associated with this research, since in the real world, the captive axolotl population was genetically altered with tiger salamander DNA sometime in the 1970s, which introduced the now relatively common albino coloration that many of us associate with those cute little guys. Oh, look at him, who's a cute little Uncle Peter. Lastly, all the albino creatures we see on the East Coast could be the result of the founder effect. In essence, this effect is the result of a small, isolated population that, since it lacks the genetic diversity of a larger population, will have higher instances of recessive genes manifesting, so things like albinism would be more common. With the atomic destruction of nearly everything, it is extremely likely many animal populations were decimated, leaving small, less genetically diverse groups to repopulate the new irradiated world, and recessive genes like albinism may therefore be a lot more common. Admittedly, this is my favorite of all the options, and could also explain why, except for the gulper, albinism is only seen in the East Coast creatures and not the West Coast, since their populations would be isolated from each other. Seeing a ton of albinos is one thing, but albinism in Fallout is also pretty freaking weird. While wandering around the wasteland, gazing upon these multitudes of albino creatures trying to slash, gore, or eat me every other step, I did wonder, how could so many of these survive to adulthood? Intuitively, it seems that they would be at greater risk of predation if they can't blend into their environment, or conversely, if they are a predator, unable to be effective hunters if they can't sneak up on their prey. Additionally, a lot of natural pigment and coloration protects against harmful ultraviolet radiation, which is of course a natural consequence of being outside when the sun is shining. You know, that thing more of you should probably do. All of this is to say that animals with albinism seem like they would be less likely to survive, and real-world research shows this is more or less true. In addition to decreased survivability, it's also normal for albinistic mates to be rejected, making it harder to pass on those genes. Some species of fish show overall lower albino viability. They take longer to spawn, they lay fewer eggs, and overall just show lower survivability, all else being equal. That makes it all the more interesting then that in every single instance, the albino creature variants are stronger than the base variant. In the case of the Radstag, the albino variant is not that much better. It's only one step above the normal Radstag, with a very modest increase in attack and health, but surprisingly can sometimes do poison damage on a strike? For the most part though, albino variants are pretty damn tough. The mongrel is the third most powerful, so is the yaoguai, the angler, and even the deathclaw. Albino is the most powerful type of gator claw, although to be fair there are only 2 variants, and of course we cannot forget that completely absurd albino rad scorpion from Fallout 3. Albino rad scorpions in Fallout 4 and 76 are luckily far weaker and are in the middle of the pack after Todd and company heard the cries of 1,000 Fallout 3 players crying from their monitors. These monstrously powerful albino variants are interesting to think about, but I believe we can absolutely make sense of all of this. If we suppose that it is indeed more difficult for albino creature variants to mature and reach adulthood, then they will probably be some of the toughest, most capable, and meanest little bastards in the wasteland. Hence, why they can be some of the most powerful encounters with devastating attacks and gobs of health. It makes sense that they would have to make up for sticking out like a sore thumb and having higher mortality by being able to attack any number of incredibly deadly wasteland creatures at the drop of a hat. This may explain why albino rad scorpions in Fallout 3 have more health than nearly everything else, why albino deathclaws will pick you up and gut you like a fish, and why pale fog crawlers will emerge from Adam's holy fog to eviscerate you without a second thought. Speaking of my favorite bullet sponge enemy from Fallout 3, the albino rad scorpion has an extra small, emphasis on small, special power. Albino rad scorpions, and only albino rad scorpions, will regenerate health over time. But it's not a lot, only around 0.05 health points every minute, which is almost nothing compared to the insane 1,500 HP they have at maximum health. The strangest part about this health regeneration is that it only happens in the day, when the rad scorpion is basking in the sun's light. Normally that'd be pretty dangerous for an albino creature, but something has now made it beneficial. The albino rad scorpion can heal itself from sunlight like how ghouls can heal from radiation. This could make an additional small advantage for them, lessening the disadvantages we spoke of earlier, and is maybe the entire reason these rad scorpions could grow to be so absurdly powerful. They can just sit and grow in the sun like a freaking plant. There's just one more problem though, because in the real world, melanin is important for more than just blocking UV radiation. In mammals, it's an essential component for eye formation when in utero. This means that all mammals, humans included, have their vision impaired from birth, something that if left unaddressed will heavily impact learning and development. Looking at Fallout, we see no such decrease in perception for mammals like the radstag, yaoguai, mongrel, etc. Indeed, the one case of human albinism that we can see in the NCR Ranger, called Ghost, also makes it seem like this is not an issue whatsoever because, well, she's a freaking NCR Ranger. They don't let One-Eyed Willie into the Rangers for a reason. Plus, she is good enough at her job that she was the only one to see the smoke from the Legion's sacking of Nipton off in the distance. We can either suppose that, in this case, the visual impairment brought on by albinism was just unaccounted for by the developers, or that albinism works a bit differently in the Fallout world. I mean, rad scorpions heal in sunlight, or that all these supposed albino creatures we see are in fact just some sort of pale version rather than true albinos. One would think that there wouldn't be that much more to say about albinism in Fallout, but there is one more important note to bring up. In Fallout 76, the incredible cryptid called the Mothman can be summoned by its cult followers, and it doesn't matter which Mothman version, whether it's the grape-flavored purple-eyed wise Mothman or the cherry, red-eyed holy Mothman that is worshipped by bloodthirsty zealots. One of the requirements to summon these guys is troughs full of albino radstag blood. During the Mothman equinox, when we can help the purple-robed, enlightened cultists summon the wise Mothman, we are instructed to find and kill albino radstags in order to harvest their blood. No other kind of radstag will do. Lucky for us, the area will soon be swarming with hostile albino radstags. Funny how that happens, as Joanna, one of the cultists, tells us that the blood must be presented to entice the Mothman. The only non-hostile follower of the red-eyed Holy Mothman is Stephen Scarberry, a possible camp follower that through idle dialogue will also mention the need for albino radstag blood for the summoning rituals, always complaining that he doesn't have enough of it, and also expressing surprise that their rival group, the purple-clad Wise Mothman cultists, also use albino radstag blood in their summoning ritual. What makes the blood from an albino radstag special or unique? No other albino creature can be harvested for this, and no other variant other than the albino can be satisfactorily used. And why is that? This may be a reflection of real-world beliefs from various cultures and parts of the world that believe that albinism, particularly in humans, is a manifestation of magic or the supernatural. Some groups in Africa, even into the modern day, believed those with albinism could be used to cure diseases such as HIV, and there were even a spate of killings as witch doctors specifically used body parts in their potions in order to imbue good luck or prosperity. In South and Central America, some groups believed albinism showed that an individual was some sort of intermediate step between humans and gods. And so we can see that there have consistently been supernatural abilities or powers attributed to albinism, and the requirement for albino radstag blood may be something similar. The blood itself doesn't have anything special about it, and it also can't be used for anything else other than the summoning ritual. But there is still one more thing I want to bring up. The Mothman cultists, in particular those that worship the red-eyed Holy Mothman, worship more than just their nighttime watcher. Their religion extends to the wood and ancient twisted beings that can be found deep in mines, like the interloper. These strange entities seem to be inspired by Lovecraftian cosmic horror. But how exactly does this connect to our conversation about albinos in the Fallout world? Well, there are two prominent instances of albinism within Lovecraftian lore, a twisted and malformed version of the great emperor penguin that was created by the Elder Things. After several generations in underground portions of Antarctica, they changed to lose their pigmentation, nearly lose all eye functionality, and became grotesquely deformed and acquired a gut-wrenching stench. Lucky for us, they're not dangerous or aggressive, unlike nearly everything in the wasteland, but could some of these twisted, mutated creatures we see in Fallout's wasteland that manifest albinism have a cultic origin? One of the very direct connections to the Cthulhu mythos is the Dunwich Horror, a novella about a revolting being that was birthed and raised with the intent to open a mythical door and free the great old ones so that they may reclaim the earth. Dunwich is a name that has come up several times in some of the more recent Fallouts, first in Fallout 3 at the Dunwich Building, and again at the Dunwich Boars LLC Marble Quarry, both of which had dark, mysterious, occultic connections. I bring this up because the woman who carried and gave birth to the Dunwich Horror was a sickly, deformed woman with albinism. Once again, a connection between the occult and this specific condition. Given Fallout's recent injection of Lovecraftian-influenced lore, I think it should be brought up in this discussion because of the direct connections between the albino radstag blood and West Virginia's local cult. So Fallout has a pretty remarkable number of creatures that can be found with albinism, and all of them are more dangerous than the base versions, some ridiculously so. There are so many now, either due to the effects from radiation, chemical treatments, laboratory research, or a natural consequence of small populations with low genetic diversity surviving the apocalypse. Albino creatures seem to be getting along just fine. Maybe one could even say they are now thriving, since so many can be seen and they can be so powerful, possibly a result of having to survive with the disadvantage of not blending in and possible damage from UV exposure. There don't appear to be any detrimental effects with vision that is well established with albinism in mammals, and there is a firm connection between the power or the allure of albino blood and the cult of the Mothman, which has links to the eldritch gods and occultic groups present in Fallout. So what could this all mean? Looks like I'll need to investigate that a little further in another video. Thanks for hearing Adam's word this day. As always, I want to hear your thoughts and comments, and if you agree or disagree. If you like what I do, support me in whatever way you choose. You can join me on Patreon or YouTube like these lovely people who make up Adam's Army, and they help me continue to do what I do. Special welcome to Smiler and Matt Storer on YouTube, and as usual, a big thank you to my top tier supporters that give their all to Atom. Hackard B, Gardner Minshew Simp, Dommy Double, Tapey Papey, Juan Vader, The Bread Man, Tyler Eaton, Owen Balzer, Ann94, Tessa Storm, Unky Nick, TSK Lego, Shallow Fire 13, Nathaniel Jolling, Tateranus, and Ace Jacobs. Take care of yourselves and all of Adam's creations. Embrace his holy glow, and I'll see you soon.